observing. My name is Albert Fisher. I'm the director of the GOOS project office, which is based here at the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission of UNESCO in Paris. And I'll be moderating today. And for the next hour, we'll be starting with about a 30-minute presentation from Martin Visbeck, who's on the line here. Martin doesn't need much introduction to most of our community. He's professor of physical oceanography at GEOMAR in Kiel, Germany. And he's the coordinator of the AtlantOS project, about which we'll be hearing today. After Martin's presentation, we'll conduct a question and answer session, and that will be done by chat. You can see the chat box already up on your window. If you want to ask clarifying questions during the presentation, please feel free to go ahead and type those into the chat box, and I'll be moderating the chat questions at the end of the webinar. The session is being recorded and will be uploaded to the GOOS website once the webinar is over. So Martin, let me turn it over to you without any further ado for the presentation.
Yes, thank you, Albert, and welcome around the world to my maybe first or second webinar. So I'm very excited and happy to be here with you and to share with you some of our thoughts, ideas, and ambitions for the AtlantOS activity in the Atlantic. AtlantOS is two things. It's an activity about a regional implementation strategy for the global ocean observing system and to provide ocean information. But it's also a funded activity from the Commission, from the European Commission, and we've been able to respond to a call. And the title of AtlantOS, that particular project, is Optimizing and Enhancing the Integrated Atlantic Ocean Observing System. I want to recognize Johannes Carstensen, who is right now on Meteor in the South Atlantic doing an AtlantOS related activity around capacity building and revisiting some of our important observations there, and also Anja Reitz, who is the coordinator of the AtlantOS project, all based here in Kiel. The particular EU project details are on this slide. It has given us the opportunity to spend a little bit of money, about 20 million euros over a 4-year period. And we are 62 partners, and I'll show you just a rough idea of who we are in just a second. It's what they call in EU speak a research and innovation call. So a project that proposes to advance our ability to integrate ocean observing across many disciplines and also across the actor space in the North and South Atlantic. And the goal of AtlantOS, the activity, is to integrate the so far more loosely coordinated set of existing ocean observing activities to a more sustainable, more efficient, fit for purpose, integrated Atlantic ocean observing system. The next couple of slides, I won't read out every institution, but if you want to look for your favorite partner, you might find them there. So in AtlantOS, there is a couple of European Marine Research Institutes. You see some of the logos here. On the next slide, you see on the top a couple of universities who are very active in thinking about and improving Atlantic observations. At the bottom, these are very important marine service providers in the European space, between the Met Office, ECMWF, CLS, but also Mercator Ocean, who is providing one of the Copernicus marine services for Europe. And then we have multi-institutional organizations such as ICES, the Marine Board, GOOS, but also the IOC of UNESCO, who Albert is with, EMODnet, UMEDnet, and other actors. And we're very happy and proud that we have also international partners as part of the AtlantOS project. That is Canadian partners, Miopa and Dalhousie University, Woods Hole, Oceanographic, a couple of NOAA labs, and also a group from Brazil and South Africa. There are some partners from the private sector. These are small and medium-sized companies that work with us, and you see some of them listed on this side. So you see it's a collection of different types of people, but now we are also inviting all of you, if you want to, and the community to become an AtlantOS member. We used to call them AtlantOS supporters, but we've just in agreement to maybe change that name, because we want them to be equal members of the AtlantOS family. Supporter sounds a bit like you're supporting somebody who is higher up than you. That is not the idea. So we are inviting the Atlantic community to engage and participate in all the AtlantOS activity to benefit from some of the funding that we have, but also work together towards that ambition. So I'll structure my talk in 4 different aspects. First, I'll briefly go over some of the main questions. That's an easy one for this audience, partners in Atlantic observing and frameworks. And then in the second 15 minutes, I'll tell you a little bit about the various activities and work packages that we're engaging in the AtlantOS project. So it should be obvious to you that there's many reasons why Atlantic information and observation is important. They could be around ocean and climate, sea level change, heat uptake, ocean acidification, just to name a few buzzwords. They could be around life in the ocean. That could be fish abundance, phytoplankton activity, but also species changes and the biodiversity of the system. It can be issues around the deep sea mapping, habitat mapping, but also preparing information for other uses of the deep sea. For example, here's a picture of marine mining, but oil and gas and others are increasingly interested in more information about the deep ocean. We have a variety of challenges around marine services, which are in Europe provided by the Copernicus Marine Service through Mercator Ocean and CMEMS. That's the Copernicus Marine and Environmental Service for Europe. So they provide information against maritime safety, marine resources, the coastal and marine environment, but also against weather and seasonal forecasting of ocean and climate. And last but not least, around sustainable development. Most of you know that last year a set of sustainable development goals was agreed to by the UN member nations. And within that set, which is around working together around the globe for a more sustainable development, there's goal 14, which is specifically about conserving and sustainably using the oceans and seas for marine resources in support of sustainable development. And I saw here in this agenda, there's a need for more concise, better internationally coordinated ocean information and ocean observation. And that would be for the not yet decided indicator framework. Who are our partners in Atlantic observing? And now I mean partners from the European perspective. It's certainly all coastal states around the Atlantic and those who are interested in working with us there. But there's 3 particular aspects I'd like to highlight. On the one hand, there has been a political process known to those in Europe, US and Canada as the Galway Statement on Atlantic Ocean Cooperation. And here the idea is that there should be an effort made to strategically work better together between Canada, US and Europe in the wide sphere of Atlantic ocean research, but that also includes ocean observation, ocean information. And here this particular AtlantOS activity is seen as one of the implementing mechanisms of the Galway ambition. Second, at the global level, we have GEO, the Group on Earth Observation, with GOSS, the Observing System of Systems. And GEO has launched a few years ago an initiative called the Blue Planet Initiative that is thinking about oceans and society. And you see here the partners, and that is GOOS, who's hosting this webinar, POGO, GOOD, the Committee on Earth Observation and Satellites, as well as the Coastal Zone of Practice Community under GEO. And they've set out to do a number of tasks under this Blue Planet initiative. And there are 6 outlined here. The 2 yellow ones are the most important ones for our ambition here at AtlantOS, that is promoting sustained ocean observations, but also developing the capacities and societal awareness around the globe to do that. So AtlantOS you can think of is as the Atlantic sector implementing agent of the wider Blue Planet ambition. We do something on ocean forecasting, we do a little bit on ocean and climate and carbon. We do not so much about the coastal zone, but there's a little bit of connection there. There's also some connection to ecosystem and food security, but those 2 yellow boxes are the main ambition that we're working on. Third, what frames can we build on to our AtlantOS ambition? And here we are taking advantage of the global community's activity under the series of OceanOps conferences, the first one in 1999, the second one in 2009. At the 2009 conference, the International Ocean Observing Community has agreed to come up with a better, improved strategic framework of how to do business, and that is by today known as the Framework for Ocean Observing. GOOS has been very instrumental in putting that forward, and that Framework for Ocean Observing, many of you know, it is really a simple way of looking at the whole process of setting requirements for ocean observation. Then in this middle purple box, understanding the processes, the implementation, and the complementarity of networks. So that's the observing activity as such, but then making very sure that all the information gathered from the various actors gets put together in a joint database that allows the joint analysis, delivery, and construction of products that will then feed back information against the requirements given. And the document here, the Framework for Ocean Observing, should be very familiar to most of you. And if you're not familiar with that, I highly encourage you to pick up a copy from the web and take a look at it. One of the key currencies are the essential ocean variables. That gives us a focus around which are the key parameters that we need to understand better, that we need to observe well, that we want information against from the observing system. So it's a subset that is focusing on high impact and feasible cost. It's a negotiated quantity, and we're working on that as well in AtlantOS. The third element that we're using in our strategic work is to understanding what we do in this space of readiness. So we're very appreciative and excited about new ideas which come to us at the concept state. These could be new sensors, new platforms, new ways in which to do observing. They need to be understood better, looked at, maybe a little bit further developed, so that they can become then in the middle level a pilot. So a pilot is an activity of observing that maybe is funded for a few years, that allows us to get a better understanding of the capabilities of what that observing technique capability can provide us with. It allows us to understand the governance framework, the cost around it, and eventually, if such a pilot is successful and is seen as helpful and useful, the system could be up to a mature level. Mature meaning it could be employed for a long time. The data delivery is well established. These are well understood processes and well vetted, documented, calibrated information products that come out of such a system. So this framework then put together this is a more detailed description of what the framework of ocean observing says. It goes from requirement to essential ocean variables. Then you have this big trade space in the middle where all the observations get looked at. And then out of that comes the data assembly and data information products delivery. So concepts I think you are very familiar with. As you can imagine, observing in the ocean is a challenge because we cover a variety of space and time scales. And just a particular graph is showing here that shows you, depending on the scientific question or a need for information you have, whether it's on the regional or even global scale, and time scales could be between days, seasons, out to decades. And to cover that space is a challenge and requires a very smart action and activity in a systems perspective on ocean observing. We are very fortunate that around the globe, but also in particular in Europe, we have a very capable space segment. In Europe, ESA and the Copernicus systems are working together to deploy and maintain a number of missions. In particular, the operational missions are meant to be long-term under the Sentinel label. Sentinel 1, 2, 3 and Sentinel 3A was just launched a few weeks ago, which will give us sustained measurements of sea level. Many of them work on sea surface temperature, but also ocean color. So these are the space elements to it, but what AtlantOS and GOOS is trying to supplement that with an in-situ capability. Currently, we have a global ocean observing system operating in all basins around the globe. In AtlantOS, we are particularly looking at the Atlantic sector of it. There's many elements to that. There's different reasons why we're doing it, as I mentioned before, and networks that are providing that information. And in AtlantOS, we are very excited about all of them and trying to understand better what their various capabilities and complementarities are, and how we can make them work together in a very good way. We also understand that globally that system is maybe 60% complete or so. Some networks are more on the 90% complete, some are a little less than 50%. So together we'd like to see that we can advance the engagement and the performance of all of these observing systems together. If you like beautiful pictures, here's one that just shows you the various networks in a schematic. This could be from animal tracking, this could be research vessels, this could be operational vessels, robotic networks, moored networks in the space segment, also land-based activities. So to really look at all of that space is what we're interested in AtlantOS, and here we're for the Atlantic. We're focusing on the Atlantic basin. If you want to say so, south of Svalbard, Spitsbergen, covering all of the North Atlantic, the tropical Atlantic and the South Atlantic, to somewhere like the tip of Africa and South America before then the Southern Ocean proper starts. So here are some of the actors in the European sphere that you are very familiar with. Sorry, let me just go one more back. So we're building and connecting all of these activities to really see what the sustained ambition of them can be and how to best implement that for the years to come. Now, the project AtlantOS as such has a couple of work packages that we're working through over the next 3 years. We are about in our 9th month of activity. And what I will do now is I will show you just a little bit about the ambition and the kind of anticipated work of each of these work packages. This slide just shows you all the 11 work packages on one slide, but it also shows you the member countries that we have in the AtlantOS project, that funded activity. But certainly we hope that by the end of this year, we have all the European and African and American coastal states partners in the AtlantOS activity, because although the funding comes from the European Union, but the beneficiaries should be really all around the Atlantic. At the highest level of objective, it's hard to read here. What we're trying to really deliver is innovation and research that allows us to deliver a more fit-for-purpose system that integrates the existing activities and to really make a steps change for planning of the sustained observing, to make a steps change of sharing the data, and in that sense leave a legacy or a blueprint behind. And what we're really building on voluntary contribution of all of you to make this a reality. And I'll just say one word about funding. Although we're getting 20 million, which might sound to you a lot if you would get it in your lab, but actually if you compare that to the level of funding that is available for Atlantic observing, I've estimated the in situ segment runs somewhere between 300 and 400 million euros per year of investment of largely national funding. So against that, a 2 or 3 million contribution from the EU AtlantOS project is not much. So we have to be very smart about it. And what we're trying to do is advance best practices, coordination, readiness level, these community building activities, rather than actually funding a significant part of the observing system. The work packages have different ideas around them. And I apologize for the Mac PC conversion here, that the logo of which should really not be there so visible to you. The first work package is about observing system requirements and design studies. And here we're interested to understand better which of the networks should we elevate, should we build more on, how much of a volunteer observing system do we need, what's the benefit of research vessels, what can robots do. So here we're trying to really use this quantitative way of OSSIS, the Ocean System Simulation Experiment, to guide the design. But at the same time, in Work Package 1, we're also looking at all the requirements and engaging in that debate around essential ocean variables, trying to understand how to negotiate them and come up with those essential, meaning that have the possibility to deliver needed information, but also have the possibility to actually get funding behind it so that information can be available on a sustained basis. And here, as I said before, we're using this quadrant of impact and feasibility, and we are particularly interested in those who have a high impact and which are highly feasible. And that set is negotiated right now in Work Package 1, what that would be for the North and South and Tropical Atlantic. The second work package is about enhancement around ship-based observing capabilities. So here we're interested in activities like Go Ship. We're interested in the SOOP, the operators of commercial vessels that are voluntarily giving us some of their capabilities. And we're also interested in looking at new capabilities around biogeochemical and ecological variables. But we also want to bring in activities under fishery services, say in the North Atlantic through ICES, because sometimes we have reasons to be in the ocean, say for fishery services. We're not using those platforms very well also for climate and other agendas. So we really want to bring all these things together. And also an exciting work is around deep sea mapping, where we could use the fleet of research vessels more favorably, but maybe also have some dedicated missions towards a high resolution C4 bed mapping for some of the commercial activities and science activities around that. We're interested in autonomous observing networks, although ships are very important, in particular research vessels, but we don't think that we can double or triple the research fleet. So much of the growth for new information is going to come out of autonomous observing networks. And there we're interested in supporting the variety of those. In AtlantOS in particular, we are advancing the Argo capabilities, new sensors around biogeochemistry, maybe also a bit more improved data transmission rates so we can maximize our impact from Argo. We're interested in ocean sites. These are the moored arrays for fixed point biogeochemical and climate measurements in the tropics as well as the exotropics, but also transport mooring arrays, all of this under the ocean sites networks. We're interested in glider networks, which can connect the coastal zone to the open ocean. Surface drifters have been instrumental to calibrate sea surface temperature, but also provide other information. And we're also very excited to grow the European Animal Tracking Telemetry Network that allows to track animals, fish, and other higher trophic animals in their biological behavior, but they can also be used to get an idea of the state of the ecosystem. Here, the main goals are to advance the sharing of best practices and the data distribution and the delivery of the data in a timely fashion, also high quality data. Work package 4 is about the interface with the coastal observing system. We fully realize that AtlantOS is mostly focused on the deep or blue ocean, but it's benefiting from the activities and being complementing to those who are happen in the coastal zone. But we both realize, the coastal community and the blue ocean community, that interface is in need of attention. And I think here networks like gliders, wave gliders, but also diving gliders as one way that we could look at, but we really want to make sure that we're not losing that interface between the coastal activities and the open ocean, so the information is seamless and can be delivered against that shared set of requirements. We have looked at two particular reasons to showcase how more integration between the various actors can lead to more information and more community building. So we're looking into the North Atlantic and the South Atlantic for that. We have ambitions around climate and OSNAP in the north and SAMOC in the south, but we also have fisheries activities there and biogeochemical challenges. So we really want to showcase for those two regions how working together can benefit the observing system, the observing capability, and get some efficiency around that. We have cross-cutting issues and emergent networks. And what we mean here is common metrology and best practices. So that's around data calibration, setting up international standards, but it's also around best practices in the deployment, maintenance, and operation of the system, and also sharing of platforms like ships, robotic platforms, and the like. We really want to facilitate this international collaboration and dissemination practice. And there are new emerging activities around biogeochemistry and ecology, even around various omics technologies that I think we can grow and foster to be as potent as some of the physical and chemical networks are today. Work package 7 is extremely important. It's about data flow and data integration. We all realize that we have quite a few data in the system that don't manage to get delivered in real time or very close to real time. We really want to streamline this process so all the information becomes available to all of them interested. So data harmonization is an issue. Serving into EMODNet on the European side, into the GOOS data portals is important. And again here, best practices are very, very important, and we have very strong activities there. It's really about making that data available for those who want to provide information in the community, and that link between what's happening in the field and the users is so essential and sometimes not resourced adequately. Let me just switch over here. There's 8 work packages around societal benefits from observing and information systems. And here we just selected 8 small projects to show the value of observing. And they're listed here. We have an activity around harmful algae blooms, around oil spills, about the Marine Strategy Framework Directive for Europe, around coastal flooding, around a particular fish abundance, tuna modeling, ship routing, offshore aquaculture siting, and in some ways to also really connect our activities with activities which are done in EMODNet basin checkpoints that POGO works on and other activities. But here the idea is just to showcase a little bit about what better coordination can do to deliver the information that is coming out of our observing systems and what societal benefits can be. We don't mean this at all to be complete, and any volunteers who can give us another good examples of what their information product is bringing to society based on sustained ocean observing is exciting to us. Last but not least is the system evaluation and sustainability. What we're trying to do is get a better handle of an idea of how the real-time system is operating in the Atlantic. There are some actors who are doing that very well, but we don't have that very well coordinated around the various spheres. We want to properly document whether the essential oceanic variables are observed and whether that information becomes available in the database and can deliver the information. But we also want to develop a long-term plan for the national ambition and for the global sustainability of Atlantic observing. That it needs engagement, communication, and dissemination, because it's coastal states, countries who are paying for this. They like to know what are they getting out of the observing system. There's a benefit for science for sure, but also a benefit for society. So we're working on engagement strategies that connect the various actors to our ocean observing activities. It's about data dissemination and exploitation, but it's really also about capacity building, communication across the project, between different EU projects, between different GOOS projects, not only within the Atlantic sector, but also with the global footprint. So together, this is sort of the scope and the summary of how AtlantOS is operating. You can see here a little bit how the money gets distributed. That's not equal between each work packages, but I think it's maybe not too surprising how it all flows. We try to be really resourcing well these requirement setting, but also the data flow integration and societal benefits areas, but certainly the technical readiness level of the observing as such is an expensive proposition, and quite a bit of resources go into that activity. At the very end, our ambition is to deliver in time for the OceanOps 19 conference a blueprint for integrated Atlantic ocean observing. That blueprint should outline an improved vision for Atlantic observing. It should outline the needs for information, the requirement setting. It should outline the capabilities of the networks that we have available to us in the Atlantic sector. It should talk about improvements in data flow. It should talk about various analysis there, but it also mentions new technologies and new opportunity spaces. But to me, the key point that this blueprint is trying to do is to really allow nations to commit their resources against that AtlantOS plan. We want to hear from nations what their ambition is about the need for information, but we also want to hear from nations what their ambitions are around capabilities that they are already engaging into the AtlantOS community, but also planning to do this for the next 5 or 10 years. So I think it's very essential to have that blueprint, that understanding of what the various actors are doing to really optimize the contribution from the private sector, from the government sector, from the non-government sector. So all the actors have a role to play, and AtlantOS is trying to bring them all together. And with that, Albert, I'm going to close and just thank the EU for funding the AtlantOS work.
Thank you very much, Martin. Thank you for that very clear and careful presentation. So the floor is open for questions, and participants are invited to type into the chat window, and I'll select questions from that chat and ask them. And to kick us off, let me start with a few questions of my own, if you don't mind. Martin, the Atlantic, particularly the North Atlantic, has been one of the most observed oceans because of the traditional oceanographic powerhouses around it. From that sort of density of observations, what have we learned, and what do you think we're ready to prioritize in terms of what's most important to observe, or are we still in a mode where we want more?
I think we are definitely in the North Atlantic in a very happy spot in the sense that there has been the focus of attention for capable nations, in particular nations in Europe and Canada and the United States who have assets to bring to bear, and we've done a lot in the name of research, understanding the ocean in the name of discovering in particular deep sea. But we're seeing not only in Atlantic but globally an increased need for ocean information against new ambitions. We're very aware of a growing population, has a need to look into the ocean for solutions around food. They look to the ocean around resources. It could be oil and gas, it could be minerals, even things as sand. So the ocean, it becomes more and more interesting for a number of actors. And I would say in the Atlantic, our observing system has largely been driven by science and fisheries, and a little bit by the commercial sector, but I think we really want to harmonize that and respond to the new needs. The Atlantic Basin is an interesting one because we do have capabilities and capable nations, so they can try out that collaboration, that more systematic look at observing in the Atlantic. But we'll have to say, Albert, although yes, the Atlantic is endowed with a lot of observations, but if you ask for have our act together in actually sustainably providing that information, I will say that is true for Argo, that has been somewhat true for surface drifters, but when you come already to ocean sites, that's the Moored Network or any other more recent actors, or even hydrography, it's by no means clear that there's a guaranteed commitment for long-term observing. So we want to revisit that and really entice our leaders and our nations to pay attention to that continuous need for high-quality ocean information. And I must say, the North Atlantic is not in much better shape than many other places around the world, although the volume is higher.
So you've mentioned some of the many reasons we need sustained observations of the oceans. One of them that you mentioned was the Sustainable Development Goals, which are global in context, not just for the Atlantic. You also mentioned that we're still working on the indicators, but can you give us some sense, some imagination of what those indicators might be and how sustained observations contribute to those?
Yes, Albert, thank you for that question. I think this is certainly, there's the first set that is right now negotiated by the UN nations. And I think it's going to be not too surprising where they're going to focus. They're going to focus on well-known targets and indicators to the UN community. So they will be around fisheries, they'll be around environmental health a little bit, but I think that is just the initial set. But we're already hearing in the European system, we have which I mentioned briefly, the Marine Framework Strategy Directive, which has a much richer set of ocean information to document what they call ocean health. And what they mean by ocean health is they like to understand how fast is sea level rising. They want to see how the ocean is warming. They want to see the propagation and regional expression of ocean acidification. They're interested in the eutrophication level. They want to know how many plastics and other pollutants enter into the ocean. They want to know about changes in biodiversity. They want to understand the fisheries and its evolution, also its potentials to harvest fish in a more sustainable way in the future, but also understanding how migration and climate provides changes in the food source for the fisheries requirements. So we see a lot of variables coming to us that we're not always prepared to deliver. In addition to that, for sustainable development, there's a need for a baseline understanding of the seabed, for activities that have to do with seabed, use of seabed for various types of commercial activities, and certainly also there's a need for understanding for sightings of wind farms, ocean energy, ocean aquaculture arenas. So although some of our old friends, like the ones that we know from the climate side, but there's some new challenges out there that I think in AtlantOS we're trying to get our heads around.
And then let me just ask one more question of my own before I jump into the questions on the chat. So you talked there about some indicators that were more about raising the alert, which has been a mode that science has been in quite a bit related to climate. For example, we see that the ocean environment is changing. from climate change, from local pressures as well. Ocean ecosystems are changing. So that's in the mode of raising the alert. And you talked about some examples of how ocean observations help find solutions and develop solutions. And how do we, can we move more in that direction in a way of having sustained observations feeding into solutions rather than just alerting?
Yeah. Thank you, Albert, for that question as well. I think this is an area where in AtlantOS we have from the start been very clear that a key element of setting these priorities is to go beyond, to go our consultations beyond the science sphere, to actually talk about decision makers, those who need ocean information for their development decisions, for their business model, for their commercial ambitions. And I think if you engage that group of stakeholders, you're getting much closer to where the solution space is. Because, for example, the fisheries community in Europe and otherwise is interested to engaging in more sustainable management of the fisheries. That is, for one, has one element that is pretty obvious, that is agreeing to quotas that are actually allowing for sustainable fisheries. But there's a much richer set of information needed. They want to understand how is a warming environment impacting fish stocks, and can we expect more or less fish resources from that. Another solutions area is around energy from the ocean. We're getting, that is more the coastal community at this point, but there's an interest from nations to explore what opportunity space in the solution area comes from the ocean. Is it mariculture and maybe providing some ways of getting hydrogen from the ocean? Or is it the wave energy, the wind energy, the currents energy? Is it tidal power plants? And if you want to up your ambition in that area, you need certain spaces in the ocean to reserve for that. That space is competing with fisheries, that space is competing with conservation, it's competing with the tourism sector. So spatial planning is in need of baseline information for that. Now, that is focusing on the coast, but a lot of the coastal conditions are also changing because the global ocean as a big boundary condition is shifting. So what AtlantOS is trying to make sure that information flow is seamless from the coast, where most of the actions is today, but also takes note of and takes into account the ocean space. In the arena of climate, the solutions is maybe more on climate predictions, to build more climate resilient communities. We want to understand how the climate is changing on all time scales, seasonal, interannual, decadal, and longer. So there's a feed into solutions from that end. But there's also a really big interest in understanding better of how much destruction, or what would be the impact from more destructive activities like sand mining, like mining of the coastal zones, maybe oil and gas, but also gas hydrates. And here sometimes the baseline information is not available yet, and AtlantOS is helping to get those organized in a more ocean systems way of thinking.
Thanks, Martin. So let me ask a question from Ronald Souza of Brazil. He's from the Brazilian National Institute for Space Research, INPE. He says, I'm leading a decade-long effort to measure air-sea interaction variables in the South Atlantic. How important are those variables to AtlantOS, and how can we better collaborate?
So Ronald, thank you for that question. That's an excellent one. I'm going to answer it in two ways. First of all, air-sea interaction variables are extremely crucial because, as you well know, they are connecting the ocean to the atmosphere, which is fundamental to understand the ocean and the climate connectivity. Now, we're leaving it up to the process that are engaged in GOOS, but through their panel, but also the AtlantOS community is working with them. And I leave it to those experts to decide and work through with me whether it's the air-sea variables as such, meaning measurement of heat flux, rain, radiation at the surface is where we need more. Is it better to use sort of the indirect variables like atmospheric states, ocean states, to sort of back them out in a data assimilation way? These are discussions which are actively ongoing, but I think you will see that certainly there's paid attention to that. But on the engagement side of things, I would really much invite you, Ronald, to become a member of the AtlantOS family, because it allows you to integrate your activity into the AtlantOS family, to benefit from some of the workshops, capacity building activities that we're engaged in. And we're particularly fond to have Brazil as a partner in AtlantOS in the formal sense, but we really want to branch out and really have a wider base of community base that for people who are interested in supporting Atlantic observation in a sustained sense, and we invite you all to become members of the AtlantOS family.
And so then let me follow up by asking Alberto Piola's question, which is in a similar vein. There's a large number of coastal observations, large number of observations being collected by coastal nations around the Atlantic. And what's the strategy for integrating these observations as a part of AtlantOS? Is that part of the work package on data management?
So Alberto, thank you for being here with us and for the question. That is a very hard one, and I'm going to answer it in two ways. On the European side, that is now for the funded AtlantOS project. That's for me easy to answer because the European Commission has supported a couple of activities, things like Jericho, where we're specifically looking at a European perspective to our coastal observing ambition. So clearly some of the strategy work is done under that umbrella, and so what AtlantOS is doing is networking with these activities to make sure that we get a holistic point of view. But we also, and in some ways that is also true for the US and Canada, who in both nations have also well-organized coastal activities, networks, similar strategic kind of efforts that look at their coastal ambition. But I have to say that this is probably easy in the north. When it comes to your country, Brazil, the African countries, this becomes a bit more challenging, including the Caribbean. So we have to sort of figure out a good way how we can engage with the coastal community, talk to them as customers and users for the open ocean information. But I don't think that AtlantOS is the most efficient way to actually organize coastal observation as such in a coastal state or for a region. We hope that the GOOS regional alliances and some of the more regional organized efforts will do that and provide sort of that interface to the more global ambition, or say basin scale ambition of the AtlantOS community.
So to follow up on Ronald's and Alberto's question, you've talked about joining the AtlantOS family. Can you say a little more specifically about what that means? Who should be contacted? How can people participate in the activities of the AtlantOS project and join the AtlantOS network in the future?
Yes. So thank you for that, Albert. So to join the AtlantOS family is very simple. If you go to the AtlantOS website, which we showed in many places here, and it's also part of your email that you got as an invitation to this webinar. If you go on the website, there is a tab that's at this point still called supporters. Forgive us for that. It will be soon called members. But it doesn't matter, even if you register as a supporter today, you'll be a member pretty soon. And we encourage you to do so, because one thing you'll get invited to our activities, you'll get the newsletter, so you get to just be part of the AtlantOS community and hear what is going on in the AtlantOS family. Most of the workshops that we do are open to the community. We have even some funding available to some of you experts, and we're very happy to work with you in your region and your nation and see what's really needed in your area of the Atlantic, and we'd like to hear from you, and we want to make sure that whatever AtlantOS does is also supporting you in your ambition and your capabilities. It could be that you need a certain best practice, that you need access to a data provision interface. It could be that you have some ideas for an ocean service that somehow is not getting your way. It could be that you have some ambition or need for building up capacity that we can support by inviting you to our workshops. So there's many ways you can work in and through the AtlantOS family, but the starting point is to register on the website. That gets very briefly looked at, and you're within a couple of days going to be part of the AtlantOS family, and that will just give you access to the more in-depth communication of what is going on in AtlantOS.
Let me ask a question from Doug Kripe, which is about big data in a sense. He mentions the example of Geosciences Australia, which has developed a data cube with Landsat images. Basically, with an enormous amount of this Landsat data that's ready for analysis. And all that data is on a supercomputer, and the analyses can be performed quickly on the computer. So has AtlantOS given any thought to this different data model, perhaps developing an Atlantic Ocean data cube as an output?
So, Doug, thank you for listening and engaging. I think that is a very exciting idea. We certainly, as a community, are fully aware of that the available data is exploding. Certainly, satellite imagery help, but also robotics that we're increasingly seeing invading, thankfully, into our ocean space is helping for that. I would add to this, we have an increasing number of simulation capabilities, which are also providing interesting information and outputs from those operational and research type ocean system models. What we have yet as a community to work through is how to best make all that data either observable or simulated available to the community for their own research ambition. And I like this idea of a data cube. We're certainly quite interested to work through and with the GEO family to understand a bit more what are new and exciting models to do that. In AtlantOS, we have worked more on the more benign issues, that is to make sure that those information that actually get made actually make their way into publicly accessible databases. So that's the first step, to, if you want to say so, feed that data cube. But I like that data cube image, that is, you bring the data together in an interoperable sense and allow investigators, whether they're on the operational side or on the research side, to get full access of all the data that is available and the metadata and data that go with it. So that certainly is the ambition. We have a work package that looks at data. It might not be as ambitious as you like it to be, but that's certainly something we'll be actively discussing in the years to come in AtlantOS.
So, Martin, let me ask a question of my own about data. In the data space, the oceanographic community in different countries operates in different ways. There's coordination activities and interoperability activities of many different types, federated at different levels, all the way up to the level of GEO. How much of a one model do we need? How much do we need to really drive towards that one model and push the community in that direction? Or can we live with this multiplicity of models?
Yeah. I think, Albert, that is a very exciting question, and I think it's one that I don't have a very good answer to. In some ways, as often when you're in early days of activities, there's just ample room for diversity, people trying out different models. They all have potential pluses and minuses. Sometimes a sign of readiness or matureness of a community is when that early plethora of approaches maybe gets a bit more converged and a few models seem to be really successful, delivering in an efficient way. They'll become maybe then the go-to solution. I don't think that the ocean community has come up with such a converging mechanism that it's clear to us which of the various approaches are the best ones. We have certainly a couple of them in Europe. There's different ones in Canada and in the US. So in my view, this might take another 5 or so years, but on the other hand, I will say I wish we had a bit more of convergence or global leadership around that, because it is true for actors in that space, researchers as well as users. It's very confusing at times. Many of the activities are sectorial. They're good for one question, not for another question. And if you have questions around integrated ocean information, for example, for sustainable development, it's very complicated to actually find a space where all that information comes together. And GEO, I think, is providing some leadership in that area, and I'm a big fan of that. I'm not so sure whether we're ready yet to just sort of from the top down say, okay, that is the system, we just need to put some money behind it and everybody will use that. I'm not so sure we have reached that level of convergence or maturity of discussion yet, but it's certainly something we should have an eye on. And I hope that very soon some potent partners, maybe the G7 or somebody, will take some action in this space and really bring out the challenge to the community and say we really wish to have 1 or 2 major and well-resourced activities around the data, and maybe that is an area that we can collectively agree on that this would be a good frame to do it.
So let me switch gears a little bit and ask the question from Sid Thurston. He asks what plans AtlantOS has to engage with developing countries so that they may also contribute and maybe can add and benefit from AtlantOS.
So Sid, thank you for that question. That's certainly something we have also thought about for a number of technical reasons. That particular grant that we were able to get, which is about an innovation action, only allows us so much to do in explicit capacity building. So we have tried to do as much as we could within the confines of that particular proposal. But to me, this is an area in extreme need of development. And I'll answer it in two ways. I think the developing countries today could be brought in the arena of information products. Quite often there's a lot of information available either from the space segment, from global networks, from even regional ocean models that provide some information with some specificity for coastal states, but some coastal states are not even have the capability to access those free to them and around the globe information to come up with some products or some information that would help them in their challenges around development, around fisheries, around coastal protection. So my first focus for capacity building would be to work with the developing countries to enable them to use the information that is already there. Now, once that is in place, I think then very quickly a coastal state will recognize that there's certain fidelity of information or specificity that the global freely available system does not deliver, and they become interested in enhancing that. And at that point is then the time where you want to train people in maybe deploying some of the assets, learning, training them how to do it, technology, engineering, things like that. But I would definitely start with the information, the use of the existing information, and then develop that pull for actively engaging in the more complex, more costly actually doing of observing. So I think it's a big challenge and we're trying to work this through. And I was very happy to see that we were allowed to have in the AtlantOS family the North and the South Atlantic, because the South Atlantic community is doing great strides of community and capacity building, and we want to fully support them.
Thanks, Martin, for that interesting perspective. It's one that a lot of the IOC shares as well. So just before I go on to John's question, let me explore a little bit more about this this idea of joining the AtlantOS family. And there are a lot of structures already dealing with ocean observations around the Atlantic, different GOOS regional alliances, also a lot of activity in the European space with EuroGOOS more focused on operational oceanography, but an emerging use and quite a number of actors in the European space. So how does AtlantOS, the project, interface with these existing structures, and how do you envision that they should remain interfaced with the AtlantOS observing system in the future?
So I think, Albert, thanks again for that question. I think it touches on in a question that before we heard from Alberto Piola, that is, what is the difference, or how can we engage the more coastally oriented activities with the Open Ocean Challenge? I think AtlantOS has the global, the basin-wide perspective in its mind. That's the focus. We come from upping the playing field for all of the Atlantic, North and South and Tropical Atlantic. And the GOOS regional alliances, some of the European EuroGOOS activities are more focused, not exclusively, but more focused on the coastal zones. I think the coastal zone is best served by a regional approach because you have like-minded nations with like-minded or similar capabilities. So I think AtlantOS sees them as very important actors in that space. There should be no competition between us from the AtlantOS side, and in fact there should be collaboration and complementarity. And so my idea is that as we roll out a bit more our engagement strategy in AtlantOS, to really pay attention to that space, but also want to pay attention to the space of the private sector, who has some capabilities to bring to bear as well. So AtlantOS has its main focus on the basin-wide ocean, and I think many of the regional actors have more their focus on regional alliances of a subset of nations in a sub-basin, on a sub-basin scale.
Okay, and so let me look forward. This is a 4-year project. So after 2019, what do you think AtlantOS should leave behind? What would the ongoing Atlantic system look like?
So I think my great hope and ambition for the overall activity is that in the next few years we'll have established two things. First, we have a much more mature discussion around essential ocean variables, and I want to stress essential to mean does not mean nice to have. Essential means we need these variables and we have the capabilities to deliver information against them. So that's a negotiation that we have to do every few years, and the first negotiation is now supported a little bit by AtlantOS with strong support from GOOS. And so we want to go through some iteration of that and in a few years really deliver to the community what the community's ambition and wish and decision is of what the essential ocean variables for the Atlantic as such are. Second, I want a process where coastal states or contributing nations get asked the question, what is your capability and ambition to deliver sustained, or at least partly sustained, observing capabilities to the Atlantic sector? I know from Germany, we never do get asked by somebody to what do we want to contribute to the global ocean observing system or the Atlantic Ocean observing system. So GCOS, the Global Climate Observing System, does ask these questions, which is a good thing. And I think AtlantOS should do the same. But we want to work with our nations to see in which form do they want to be asked, what sort of formal or informal arrangement would they prefer to be part of that committing community, so that we have a good understanding of what the national capabilities and what are the nation's investments are and will be in Atlantic Ocean observing, so we can foresee gaps or implementing shortfalls very quickly, but we can also allow that to up the ambition, because I believe I'm a big fan of partnership, and some nations can provide some part of the system better than others. So we need to understand that better. But the overall goal would be to elevate the availability of information, to elevate the investment into Atlantic Ocean observing and its associated information delivery, but in particular also the awareness of why spending that money is actually helpful to the benefit of society at large.
Thanks, Martin. Let me ask John Gould's question now. Are you able to yet identify the components of the observing system that are in the greatest need of help in order to deliver their full potential?
Thank you, John, for being here with us and for that question. That is certainly something where some of us have views on that. But from the way AtlantOS is set up, we want to actually go through this a bit more systematically with our capabilities of exploring the ocean system, observing system simulation experiments capabilities. We want to explore a little bit where the data gets put together to really see where the challenges are. Clearly, almost all of the networks have resource challenges. And because the same benefit that Albert mentioned before, that in particular the North Atlantic has been endowed with a lot of observation from the, quote, richer or well-off nations with strong research capabilities. In times of economic shortfalls, some of the nations are withdrawing some of their investment into these activities. So we're seeing even decline here and there in observing systems. So we certainly would like to sort of counter that trend. But the way I'd like to counter that is by showcasing to the nations, if you de-invest from an observing system, this is the kind of information you will not be having at the same resolution or fidelity that you have benefited from right now. So I really want to come back to them from a user's perspective. What can you expect to not to get if you disinvest in a certain capability, and by that hope to reverse the decision or to even get them be more excited about putting more emphasis in some of the observing capabilities. But there's three aspects that we should keep in mind. Nations are looking for more efficiency, and we're getting more efficiency by being smart about what we do, infusing new technology, sharing the data, and really adhering to best practices. Second, they're looking for understanding better whether what they have is fit for purpose. So here again, sharing comes in. They really want to know, are we well prepared to answer questions about climate change in the ocean, about biodiversity loss, about sustainable fisheries, and what are the key quantities that we need from that, and do we have them or do we not have them? They also want to understand better what is an increased satellite capability allowing them to do, and is there a possibility to maybe reduce some of the more expensive in situ investment, or is it maybe the other way around, that a more enhanced in situ investment allows them to do more things and get better information than some other way. So I think this is a complex space to go through. And we're holding a little bit off to say a particular network is in need of support right now, because we really want them to be a bit more quantitative about that and to expressing that need not in number of platforms or number of observation, but actually in the space of information not available if that trend continues.
Thanks, Martin. And one last question. You mentioned there's a work package in AtlantOS that is about demonstrations of the utility of sustained observations, and there's just a few of them, and it's a small part of the project. When we talk about users of the observing system, some of them don't even know that they're users of the sustained ocean observing system. A user of a medium-term weather forecast might not know that ocean information was actually quite important in how good that weather forecast was. So do we do this only through stories, through demonstrations, or are there better ways to connect to those users that might not be as connected to the observing system as we'd like?
So I think, Albert, that's a very exciting question. I think one of the issues that we have to, as a community, work better on, we should really understand better what our high-level users are. So I'm not talking necessarily on the individual fisherman who's going to use a medium-range weather forecast, but I'm really interested in those those institutions who are capable of delivering these forecasts. I want to see on their communication strategy, on their websites, or maybe on their annual reports, some recognition of the importance of ocean observing. So these demonstration products that we're using, they're meant to, on the one hand, to maybe advance some of the technologies, but really on the other hand, use them as communication tools to really showcase the value of ocean observing and to see in which parts of society, science, private sector, governments, that information feeds into, and make those users of the ocean information available and ask them, well, you might not be able to get that information if you don't help us to say some nice words about why that is important. So use those users as advocates for the observing endeavor. And I think there's some areas that we can do much better of than we do before. Right now, it seems like those who are actively doing the observations are advocating for it. That's fine. But it would be as powerful, in some ways even maybe better, if some of our key users will actually be our advocates for the observing activity.
Thank you so much, Martin. Thank you for taking the time from your schedule to share AtlantOS with us and to share your thoughts about a broader range of subjects as well. And thank you to the audience for joining us. You were numerous today. I just wanted to mention that the next webinar is Wednesday, the 30th of March, and will be given by Sam Simmons, who is the co-chair of the GOOS Biology and Ecosystems panel from the Marine Mammal Commission of the US. So please join us for that webinar in 2 weeks' time. Thank you, Martin.
Yeah, thank you, Albert. Thank you all for joining, and thank you for the great questions. It was my pleasure to be with you.
Thank you.